Right, everybody, so we are going to get started. Welcome to the Arms Embargo Now campaign webinar. I just want to do a quick prompt before we begin, which is we're going to have a Q&A function set up so that folks can ask questions throughout the webinar. So you'll be able to see that in your Zoom toolbar. If you have questions, please put them in there. We've got folks who are going to be going through them and answering them in real time, and we'll save a few questions for the end. So if you have any questions, just get in there in the Q&A function, and we will answer them. And by we, I mean Johanna and Emma will answer them. And we will get to some questions, and we'll talk out a couple questions at the end. So welcome, everybody. This webinar is hosted by the Arms Embargo Now campaign. My name is Maya, and I'm going to be moderating tonight. We launched in May to bring together efforts to end the flow of all weapons to and from Israel. And I know many of you might be joining this webinar today of two minds, eager, willing, and angry, wanting to escalate and continue our battle against all systems that are structurally enabling a genocide to continue. And I imagine that many of you, like me, are joining this webinar with these feelings and their accompanying shudders of despair and deep, unimaginable grief. And to hold both with the same level of care and attention is our responsibility and I think our strength. And it's been over a year of genocide in Gaza and 75 years in Palestine. And over the last year, we have seen hundreds of thousands of our kin, comrades, friends, and neighbors pour into the streets, ready to mobilize to fight settler colonialism, militarism, and war. And many people who until this moment had never taken part in actions or this type of organizing in their lives. And this is really a monumental win. It's been over a year of genocide in Gaza and 75 years in Palestine, and genocides have continued in Sudan, in Congo, in Armenia, and in so many other parts of the world. And over the past year, movements in the global north have moved really at an unprecedented pace to map out each point of intersection and potential intervention on the violence enabling the flow of murder machines and trade agreements that allow them to continue. Social movements have mapped charity statuses and media alliances, parts manufacturers and Canada Revenue Agency kickbacks, private laundering, and misleading public narratives to stop the flow of everything within our power that is allowing this mass slaughter to continue. Labor unions, workers' rights organizations, new collectives, national coalitions, and even members of parliament from within the halls of power have had to heed the demands coming from the streets as our friends and neighbors have relentlessly continued this fight. This struggle has called upon so many of our loved ones to tap into an organizing endurance that a few years ago, maybe many did not think we were actually capable of. So this is no small thing, and it continues to inspire so many people to join us. All of those fighting the settler colonial structures modeled on the genocides that have taken place and continue on these territories, all those resisting this government's genocidal policies across the globe owe us nothing, but we owe them our endurance. So thank you for coming here today with your endurance, and for coming here to honor this pact that we share to stay in struggle until we win. So we launched the Arms Embargo campaign in May, and more than 400 organizations have signed on to the demand, from unions and churches to human rights, Indigenous and environmental organizations, to community groups and businesses. And together we've held 2 days of action and pushed 46 MPs from various parties to sign on to the demand. We've forced the government to take some important steps towards implementing a full arms embargo on Israel, but we still have a ways to go. So today we're going to hear from a number of speakers who have been involved in the Arms Embargo Now campaign. We're going to hear from media, from Palestinian Youth Movement, World Beyond War, labor organizers, and we're going to walk through the action toolkit for the F-35 Day of Action coming up on November 16th. So first, I'm going to throw to our speaker, Rachel from World Beyond War. And Rachel is going to give us a brief overview of the current status of the Canada-Israel arms trade and what we have and haven't yet forced the government to do about it. Rachel.
Thank you, Maya. And I mean, thank you to we're hundreds of people here who are taking a night to look at the Canada-Israel arms trade. Like this, honestly, it's like very heartwarming for me and like is the yeah, the thing that gives me energy in this work. So yeah, just a huge thank you to everyone for making the time on a Monday night to all be together. Um, to talk about something important, but like not that glamorous, like kind of technical, like that you're all here tonight is just deeply meaningful to me, who has spent maybe too much time alone in the past year digging into the Canada-Israel arms trade. So thank you all so much for being here. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna just, as Mai said, do just a few very brief things to get us started. I want to very, very quickly explain what an arms embargo is and where we're at in this campaign over many months of people giving it their all and showing up in every possible way to really push for this demand from coast to coast to coast. So an arms embargo is a sanction. It's simple. This you can go on the Global Affairs Canada website, read exactly how they define an arms embargo. Essentially, it's a sanction that stops the import and export of weapons to the targeted country. And that's exactly what the Arms Embargo Now campaign is demanding. We're demanding full two-way arms embargo on Israel, which means there should be zero weapons or military goods or goods that are sometimes used for the military, either being exported to Israel from Canada or being imported from Israel to Canada. We have not invented some new radical demand. We're asking the Canadian government, demanding that the Canadian government enact this basic power that it has to enact a sanction on Israel, given everything that has been happening. So a two-way arms embargo, again, that means that there should be no flow of weapons. We need to end the flow of weapons to and from Israel. There's a few aspects of this, and we have forced the government kicking and screaming the whole way to move a little bit towards this demand of an arms embargo. And I want to explain what they've done and what they haven't done. In terms of the part that people don't talk about that much, in terms of the aspect of an arms embargo that means stopping the import of weapons from Israel to Canada, the Canadian government has thus far done nothing. The Israeli government, for the past year, has made it exceedingly clear that arms sales from Israel to other countries around the world are central to funding their current genocide in Gaza. Canada, meanwhile, as of the most recent stats we have, which do not include the past year, was already Israel's sixth largest arms customer in the world and is continuing to make huge purchases of Israeli weapons that in many cases are literally marketed as battle-tested on Palestinians. So these are weapons that Canada is buying from Israeli companies, often Israeli state-owned companies, for the Canadian military primarily, in some cases for police forces and other government agencies as well. So just to give just one quick example of this, just this past December, several months into this genocide, Defense Minister Blair announced a new deal with Israeli state-owned weapons giant Rafael to purchase $43 million of their Spike missiles. These are missiles that the IDF is literally using now in their attacks on Gaza. So in purchasing these weaponry from Israeli state-owned company Rafael, these are Canadian taxpayer contributions that are just directly supporting Israel's atrocities in Gaza. And I think it's clear to all of us that there can be no more Canadian taxpayer money spent on Israeli-made weapons. So I wanted to start there because this is an aspect of the arms embargo that I don't think has been discussed often enough, the weapons that Canada is importing from Israel. Next, I want to move to the other side. What are the weapons that Canada is sending to Israel? And that will be largely the focus of the rest of tonight. There's basically two ways that weapons get from Canada to Israel. One is they are exported directly from here to there, and that requires a permit from Global Affairs Canada. That's what all military goods require. Here, we have forced the Canadian government to do some things. They have stopped issuing any new permits for weapons to Israel. So that means if a Canadian company now says, hey, we want to sell this weapon to Israel, the Canadian government right now is not giving them a permit. We don't know when they've paused permits until, but right now they're not giving new permits. What they haven't done, though, is dealt with the over 200 roughly 250 existing permits. So companies that already had permits signed to let them send weapons to Israel. All they've done is, according to Jolie, we haven't seen the papers, suspended 30 of them. That's 12% of the active permits. That said, the headlines in Israel around this announcement were livid. Like, this is an impactful thing for us to have forced the government to do, but we're clearly not stopping at 12% of the permits being canceled. And in fact, they weren't canceled, they were suspended. What we need to see is 100% of those permits canceled. So that's one way that weapons go from Canada to Israel. They apply, they get a permit from Global Affairs Canada, and then they get shipped there. The other way is much sneakier. Canada has an agreement with the US to allow military goods to be sent to the US without a permit, and they're not even tracked in the statistics the Canadian government releases every year about their military exports. So no one really knows about, in general, the weaponry that Canada is sending to the US, and it doesn't require a permit, even when the US is taking those weapons we're sending to them and turning it around and sending them straight to Israel. That's, in fact, how a majority of Canadian weapons get to Israel. So this is a huge problem. We have been raising this Arms Embargo Now campaign. Thousands of people across the country have started raising this. We got lucky with not exactly a leak, but by fluke, we found out about a planned export of Canadian-made explosives to be made at General Dynamics factory in Quebec that was going to go to the US and then to Israel. Once that came out, once we made a huge stink about it, Jolie, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Jolie, was forced to respond and was forced to say, okay, we won't let that shipment go through. Unfortunately, that is just one of hundreds of weapons shipments that, again, go from Canada to the US on their way to Israel with no permit and not tracked and not reported on in any way. So we forced the government to move a few inches towards this demand of an arms embargo, kicking and screaming the whole way, with huge backlash from Israel itself and from supporters of the Israeli military here in Canada. But we have a long way to go in the demand for an arms embargo. I'll leave it at there for now. But one thing I do want to say is that the only reason that the government has done these small steps towards an arms embargo that would have been completely unthinkable a year ago, 2 years ago, is because of the enormous uprising of organizing, of solidarity, of actions, from blockades at weapons factories to kite flying festivals every weekend in cities across the country, to prayer circles, to marches downtown, thousands strong. To like, you are the people who have been part of all this. You don't need to tell me to tell you what it has looked like. But that is the only reason we have forced the Canadian government to take the steps they have. And this is an example that organizers all over the world are following. Hey, look how the Canadian government has been forced on their back foot. Look how they are making excuses for what they're not doing. We need to follow their example. So we are seeing how far we have to go. But for me, what I'm saying is that if we've pushed them this far, I think that we can continue to win a full arms embargo. I'll leave it at there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And also just a reminder for folks, I know there's a lot of questions coming in the chat. There is a Q&A function that we're using. So if you look at the bottom toolbar of your Zoom, there's a Q&A option where you can submit questions, and we're going to be gathering questions there to answer in real time and also saving some for afterwards. So if you don't want to be lost to the abyss of the chat, try and get in on the Q&A function. I'm going to introduce Martin to speak next. Martin Lukacs is a journalist, author, and the managing editor of the award-winning media outlet The Breach. And Martin's going to be telling us a little bit about the Canadian F-35 supply chain. Martin.
Thank you, Maya. So back in September, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Melanie Joly, expressed probably the most clear position the government had yet taken on Canada arming Israel. She said, "We will not have any form of arms or parts of arms be sent to Gaza, period. How they're being sent or where they're being sent is irrelevant." So this was a refreshing shift in what we had heard from the Liberals so far. Just 6 months earlier, their ministers were saying things like, "We haven't exported arms to Israel in 30 years." And Jolie herself had claimed, "There have been no weapons sent under my watch." Then, of course, the powerful organizing of the Palestine Solidarity Movement had forced the Liberals to reckon with reality. They had to acknowledge that they were indeed sending weapons. And then in March, they froze permits for some new exports, as Rachel laid out. But as it turns out, and it's useful here to remember that a core competency of the Liberals is lying. Jolie's latest remarks in September were also still very far from the truth. So while, they said no arms or parts of arms would be sent to Gaza, she neglected to mention that the government has maintained a loophole, a very large loophole, a loophole big enough to fly a fighter jet through, ridden by a gaggle of liberal climate ministers pretending to care about Palestinians. And that loophole is Canada's very lucrative and very opaque business of exporting military goods to Israel. As Rachel mentioned, there is almost no regulation or reporting about it. But since the 50s, our weapons manufacturers, many of whom are, US branch plant companies, have basically enjoyed what amounts to a free trade with the US. So upwards of $1 billion of military goods a year now are exported without any regulation, without any export permits being required. And, while Canada's arming of Israel doesn't compare to some European countries and certainly doesn't compare to the US, it's not nothing either. So every F-35 jet made in the United States has at least $3 million worth of Canadian components. So since the 90s, dozens of Canadian companies, I think upwards of about 110 to this point, have been involved in helping supply key parts to Lockheed Martin, who then makes these F-35 fighter jets, and then they're sent to Israel, where Israel has been relying on them to pulverize Gaza. So at The Breach, we made a short video to explain exactly how this works. I think we're going to have a chance to watch it right now. It's just 3 minutes long.
You can hear the F-35 overhead, and it felt literally like they were about to land on top of the hospital. And then you would hear a whistling noise, and you knew that a missile was flying down and getting ready to hit.
Canada's participation in the Joint Strike Fighter program over the past number of years has already allowed companies in Canada to secure almost $3 billion in contracts, and this number will grow.
The F-35 Joint Program Office has moved at a breakneck speed to support our closest partner and ally in the Middle East, Israel.
The bomb that caused this damage is a 2,000-pound bomb, likely made in the USA, dropped by the Israeli Air Force, at least 4 times as powerful as the vast majority of the bombs used by the US in its fight against ISIS.
Canada's government has announced it will halt weapons shipments to Israel after the Canadian Parliament approved a non-binding resolution on the issue.
When you take a just-in-time mentality, it introduces a lot of risk. You get a hiccup in the supply chain, whether it be a strike or a quality issue, and then that becomes your single point of failure.
When we find out, oh wait, these are our weapons and parts that are traveling on our highways, like on the 401 right in my house, or are being made in some cases like nearly in your backyard, these are points of intervention. Direct actions to interrupt the flow of weapons to Israel have been happening en masse from coast to coast.
So since we made this video, we also, working with a researcher named Derek Rasmussen, made the discovery that there's a Canadian company, Gas Tops, that is actually the only company in the world that produces engine sensors that go into these F-35. So in other words, it's what's known as a sole source company, making it certain that every single F-35 doing these bombing runs over Gaza includes parts made in Canada. And in Holland, where peace groups are suing the government to stop the export of weapons and weapon components to Israel, groups there made a similar discovery, and it's actually been vital to their efforts to advance their lawsuit. Here in Canada, the government could end the export of F-35 parts to the US, and there are several good signs that the powers that be view this as a realistic threat, the threat of a very good example. It's why, for instance, Lockheed Martin, the weapons maker in the US, has gotten very anxious about us knowing their suppliers. Back in February, the weapons maker actually started purging their website of supplier information from the 19 countries that provide them components. And after we produced this video that you just saw, Lockheed actually scrubbed all of their remaining Canadian supplier information from their website, shrinking the Canadian web page by about 80%. It's also why when Canada froze some new permits in March, as Rachel mentioned, figures in the Israeli government had an absolutely delicious meltdown. Israel's foreign minister, I think, said, "History will judge Canada's current action harshly." Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs called it a badge of shame. I also remember several right-wing outlets, including ones in Israel, kind of angrily splashed photos of Melanie Joly next to Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, as if to imply that the liberal government had suddenly become allies of the Palestinian people. And I think it should go without saying that, were the Canadian government to stop these exports to the US, it would call the question on Canada's very long-standing, back to the 40s and 50s, in fact, integration into the US empire's war industry. So I don't think it's a move that the US government would take lightly. And, as we all know, they have a propensity to invade countries when their access to strategic resources are limited. So I do think a lot of pressure would come down. But, as the F-35s continue to rain terror and death down on Gaza, we should still aspire to be that threat of a very good example. We've taken the first steps because of the strength of movement organizing. It's really, I think, no small accomplishment to get the liberals to pretend to be doing the right thing, lying to get us off their tails. So the challenge now is to get out there, keep organizing, and make them eat their words. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Martin. A good point to end on, being that threat of a very good example. Speaking of which, we are going to hear now from Johanna and Emma with the Palestine Solidarity Network, and we're going to run through a little bit of this toolkit in the background, and I think Rachel is going to join as well. So over to all of you.
Thanks so much, Maya, and thanks, Martin, for that really comprehensive expose about the Canadian complicity in the F-35 supply chain. My name's Johanna. It's great to be here with all of you tonight. I'm on the steering committee of Davenport for Palestine, and I'm also part of the Arms Embargo Now campaign. And I'm here to help kind of introduce our exciting next step for the campaign, which is the National F-35 Day of Action happening on November 16th. So before we get into where and how people can plug into that day of action, I just want to share a little bit about why we are targeting the F-35 supply chain that Martin just laid out for us. So our campaign and movement is in kind of a strange position right now, as you may have already gathered from the previous speakers, where we've been really successful at pushing the government to take some concrete steps towards limiting the flow of arms to Israel, but they need to go so much further. And instead, they're lying to us about what's actually going on and hiding the US loophole that Rachel described earlier. And really, as somebody said in the chat, kind of gaslighting people across the country about the actual nature and current status of the Canada-Israel arms trade. So this intentional muddying of the waters makes our job as organizers really hard. And as a representative of Davenport for Palestine, I've been meeting with my Liberal MP. We've met 3 times in the last few months. And following a series of mass mobilizations outside of her office and hundreds of emails and phone calls from her constituents, we were finally able to push our MP to publicly support an arms embargo on Israel. But now she's just parroting Jolie's lies and claiming that Canada has already stopped sending weapons to Israel. So we know that's not true. And the F-35s that are bombing Gaza and Lebanon and are, stuffed with millions of dollars of Canadian parts are just one tangible and truly devastating example that proves it. So that's what we're trying to do with this day of action, is really target the companies that manufacture and maintain F-35 components to make Canada's complicity in Israel's genocide undeniable and really push back on the lies that the government is currently trying to placate us with. So we'll have to force the media and the public to reckon with the fact that Canadian technology is still being used by Israel to commit war crimes. And we'll really expose that vulnerability that Martin was talking about, that the supply chain that is building and maintaining these truly dystopic war machines. So to do this, we're really inviting people across the country, people who are on this webinar tonight, people in your organizations, in your neighborhoods, in your homes, in your communities, to come out and rally outside of the manufacturers of F-35 components that are located, as Rachel said, in and around our communities on November 16th. And so Rachel's prepped a map that kind of outlines some of those locations, and we're going to walk you through exactly how you too can kind of join this wider movement, join this coordinated day of action to help really make it explicit and clear and undeniable that those genocidal war machines are actually manufactured here. Parts of them are manufactured here, and we need that to stop. So Rachel, do you want to hop on and share your map? You can show folks. Lots of excitement in the chat about seeing where these locations actually are. There we go.
All right, hopefully you all can see that. So, so tons and tons of research has happened through us at World Beyond War, but also through, I wanna give a shout out to organizations like Project Plowshares, an arms trade think tank that does tons of, honestly, many thousands of hours, thankless hours in spreadsheets to help break down the secret ways that these weapons do travel. And then, of course, the investigations of outlets like The Breach and Maple and many other people who have been just giving so much of their time to figure out what the government should be transparently recording and reporting according to its own laws, but is not doing so. So what this map shows is weapons companies across the country that are producing F-35 parts in Canada. So again, this is the key way that weaponry and military goods do get from Canada to Israel is not through the permitted system that Jolie has talked so much about in terms of the permits that she suspended, but through the ones that don't even require a permit because they go directly to the US and then go to Israel. The F-35, I just want to be clear, is just one horrific weapon of war that is made with Canadian parts that go first to the US and then to Israel. You could also look at every Boeing Apache helicopter that the IDF uses to decimate Gaza, also has hundreds of Canadian parts in every single one of those helicopters. You could look at the drones Israel is using, and you would see a lot of the same thing. The F-35 is important because it's Israel's most advanced warplane. In fact, it's considered the most advanced warplane on the world. This is Lockheed's flagship fighter jet. It is a dystopian weapon, is the best way I can describe it. It is designed to create just as many casualties as possible, to operate with stealth and secrecy. And it is just truly disgusting the way that the most advanced weapon on the planet is being used to wipe Gaza off the map, or an attempt to do so, and now is being used to decimate Lebanon. So what we see here are companies all across the country that play an important role in that supply chain. There are two colors of dots on this map. Here, I'll just zoom in somewhere and you can see. So for example, in Winnipeg, we have an orange dot and a red dot. The orange dots represent companies producing producing components for the F-35 in Canada, but where we cannot be 100% sure which factory is producing which part. So for example, this dot here in Winnipeg is for Collins Aerospace. They partner with Elbit Systems, one of Israel's biggest weapons companies, infamous for its production of its horrific drones. They partner with Elbit to provide helmet systems for the F-35 program. But they have a handful of factories in Canada, and we're not sure exactly which one of their factories are participating, or if all of them are, or if only a few of them are. So this is an orange dot because we can't tell you with absolute certainty what's happening at this factory, but we can tell you with absolute certainty that this company in Canada is producing F-35 parts. On the other hand, this dot is for Magellan Aerospace in Winnipeg. This is a key F-35 partner, and we know that this specific factory in Winnipeg produces some of the wing components at the very back of the plane that help stabilize it in flight. This is a key component of the F-35 that Israel uses. This is our effort to be 100% transparent and clear with you about what we do and don't know. So if you zoom out all across the country, there are, I should have looked right before doing this because we keep finding more. We've got over 100 sites across the country that we have identified that are part of Canada's F-35 supply chain. And these range from companies like Martin mentioned, Gas Tops in Ottawa that produces an engine sensor, and it appears to be the only factory in the world that produces that, to, for example, a factory out in Vancouver that produces the bulkhead for the F-35, which is just the single biggest part of an F-35 jet. And frankly, all across the country, as you can see. So I won't go into too much more detail on that. What I will say is that if you live near one of these factories, we're relying on you to go check it out. I have not been able to personally visit all of these factories. I don't know exactly what their setting looks like. I can't confirm whether or not, for example, they usually have workers working on Saturday. Many of these factories have Saturday shifts. I cannot tell you for a fact which everyone does. So what I'm inviting you to do is to get to know your local F-35 weapons supplier, to go visit this Saturday and take a look at what's happening. Who are the workers working there? Does it seem like this is in an industrial park? Is this in a more accessible part of town? Really take a look at what neighborhood these are. These are your local factories that are complicit in genocide, and the workers at these factories are your potential allies in struggle to shut it down. So I'm inviting you to go visit them, to go scout them as part of your planning for an action on November 16th as part of the F-35 supply chain. And I also want to give a shout out to thousands of people across the country who have already been doing protests and blockades and actions at these factories over the past year. I'll close this map and pass it over to Emma.
Awesome. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so just a reminder, if you want to open up even that website, I'm going to share my screen and just walk you through the toolkit and everything that's available to you in designing this action. And I think one key thing to really lift up, coming from what Johanna and Rachel talked about, is that there have been many different approaches to targeting the arms trade in Canada. Many different approaches, from blockades that are shutting down and blockading workers from entering the factories, to hard pickets, to soft pickets. The logic behind this day of action is to make really explicit, by targeting F-35s in particular, that Canada is building the planes that are dropping the bombs on Gaza in Lebanon. And the way that we can do that doesn't necessarily necessitate blockading these plants, preventing workers from entering. And the logic here is really to have mass rallies all across the country with as much, public presence as possible in order to force the media to really report on the lie that has been under their noses for over a year now, which is that despite what, Melanie Joly and our MPs are telling us, Canada is building the components, building the parts that are, ultimately causing violence, destruction, and mass death in Gaza. And so want to really emphasize that regardless of the sort of level of risk that your organizations or you as an individual are willing to take, this is really oriented to being an action that is appealing and that is accessible to as many people as possible all across the country. I would love to maybe just see in the chat, if you want to drop a star, of how many people have been involved in actually organizing a day of action with the Arms Embargo Now campaign up until now. So if you've done, there's been actions outside of MP offices. What other days of action have we had? There's been several. Okay, great. Awesome, thank you. All right, so many of you in the chat will know that, as part of these days of action, we're trying to do as much work as possible to provide resources, template posters, social media graphics, and everything like that to help you, make these actions a success. So what you'll see on this webpage is if you scroll down, the map is right here that Rachel was walking you through, where you can then look up and zoom into your community and see, if you're fortunate, it's possible that you don't have any manufacturer that's building parts for F-35s, and right on, that is a good thing. There are 100 other ways to take action in order to pressure the government to stop arming Israel. It just means that you won't have a location to target for this specific action. And unfortunately, most major cities in the country are in the camp where you do have, several sites to choose from. I saw people in the GTA being overwhelmed by the amount of dots on the map. So after you do that, again, you'll want to look specifically to those red dots on the map and really try to prioritize scouting those locations. And then you'll open up this action toolkit here. So this is a 15-page toolkit. It might be overwhelming when you open it, but along the side, you can just kind of click through these tabs for whatever it is that you need, and it'll go through a sort of step-by-step guide of how to start planning your action. So at the very beginning, we kind of provide more of an overview of the campaign. Why is an arms embargo necessary? What progress has the Canadian government actually made when it comes to imposing an arms embargo on Israel, and what has still not happened? And then why F-35 manufacturers in particular? Why is it that we're targeting this specific supply chain for this day of action to really kind of make clear, Canada's complicity? Then you'll find steps to organizing your action. So it goes, it's pretty clear and explicit. You assemble a team, you target, you scout your location. Then you're going to confirm your action details. So you'll see that there's a registration form here and on the main page. And that's so we know what actions are happening all across the country. We can get your actions up on the map, and we have, lists of, at this point, probably thousands and thousands of email addresses in order to send people emails telling them about your actions, what the time and location is, so that they can show up and join you. Then you'll get into, designing your action, designating particular roles. It walks you through, some roles that you might want to think about. And then finally, I just want to point out that towards the end, this is where we're going to continue to kind of provide more templates as we go. So already you have a Canva graphic ready to go. You can edit this yourself in order to start promoting your action. And back in that toolkit, you will get template media releases, template media advisories, everything like that. And just to note, and maybe Johanna, if you want to drop this in the chat, as you go through this, if there's anything that isn't in there or that feels unclear, you can email us at info@armsembargonow.ca. And we're very, very happy to answer any questions and help support you through this. Okay, I think that's all, Maya.
Thanks, Emma. So just want to remind everybody again, all of these documents are available on the Arms Embargo Now website. So that's armsembargonow.ca/F35. You can find the toolkit Emma just showed. You can find the maps that Rachel has shown. All of this information is available to you there. It's in the chat, but you can also just type it in, and we'll follow up with the links as well at the end of the webinar. So we encourage people to go and familiarize yourself with it. You'll be able to see all of these things and access them for yourselves. I'm going to be passing it to Jada now, who's an organizer from Vancouver, who's going to be sharing a little bit about their plan for the 16th. So over to Jada.
Hello, it's a while. Can you hear me? Have I got sound? No sound?
No, we
Yes,
can hear
we can
you.
hear you.
You're great.
Okay. Hi. So in our area of so-called Vancouver, we're planning on an action to try and do a couple of things. We want to merge and team build as many of our cohorts across the lower mainland as we can, so that what we're doing is we're going to do several strategies in one day. So on the day of action, we don't think that the manufacturer is going to be open in our city. We think it's going to be closed. And it's also in a pretty remote and invisible area. So anything we do is sort of for social media purposes. And so we're trying to use it as a way to mobilize people. And we're treating it as a day of training as well as a day of action, so people can familiarize themselves with the route there, get a sense of where we're going. And we're going to have two modes of transportation to get there. We're going to do a car rally along the way and also public transit. And so on the public transit, it's only a few buses that run intermittently. So we'll be using visual aids on the buses and doing a teach-in. So for anyone traveling the bus, and in order to not get kicked off, we're just going to treat it like very loud conversations between each other. And then we're also doing the car rally. And what we're hoping, fingers crossed, is that we'll be able to get on an FM channel with the local co-op radio and have them covering it, so we can be sort of having some teach-in for people who are in the cars. We're encouraging people to, along the way, stop and do a banner drop. So creating some visuals that will be along the highway at some point. And then once we arrive, depending on the weather, if the weather's not too blustery and rainy, then we'll do lots of chalk drawing and leave our presence known. And then there's 3 manufacturers within walking distance. And so we're just going to snake through there. And what we're hoping is that people will come with their cohorts so that they can familiarize, get used to it, and plan future actions. And then we're just hoping to make it visible and have enough cohorts ready to just sort of, in an ongoing and consistent manner, keep visibilizing it. And then from our group, we're also trying to get in touch with the surrounding host nations of the Musqueam people that's their traditional territory, and seeing who there is within their nation who is comfortable lending their voice, and also gathering some of the local people so that they know what's being done in their homelands, and to mobilize there as well. Yeah, I think, I don't know if there's anyone else from our organizing crew on this call, but I'm known for forgetting and fucking up. So let's find out if anyone else is here and they can fill in the blanks. But I think that's it for us. Yeah.
Oh, Jada, that was so thorough and so, so helpful. And also just want to uplift what Rachel's saying in the chat, which is Vancouver is doing a lot of things. There's a lot of different components to this type of action. You don't have to do 1,000 components, but we thought this would be a really great example for all the things that are actually possible. There's so many different ways for you to stage your intervention, to gather people along the way, to facilitate people traveling there, to leave messages when you are there. So this is a really great example of all of the things that are possible, and really so many different options are on the table for you. So really lean into that creativity and think about the ways that you can reach people. Again, just a reminder, we've got the Q&A function set up at the bottom of the Zoom here. So if you've got questions that you want to make sure gets in front of people's eyes, please put them in there and we will answer them at the end and also live. And I'm going to push us on to hearing about another action that's going to be happening. So folks should get excited. There are a lot of actions planned across the country. There's a public rally that will be happening in Ottawa. And as Martin spoke about, this is going to be at gas tops, which many of you might have read about online when an anonymous source tipped off that a group of organizers went in and committed a whole bunch of sabotage, which is one of the core places. Actually, it's the key place where F-35 engines are produced and one of the only places in the world that produces that. So that was an incredible thing that did happen. And there is another one that will be happening in Kitchener-Waterloo, but I'm going to let our next speaker speak to that. I want to introduce Nancy with the Palestinian Youth Movement, who has been personally impacted by this genocide and arms flows to Israel, is part of the Palestinian Youth Movement chapter that is going to be planning an action. And Nancy will be speaking to the real impact of Canadian arms exports by highlighting the impact of Israel's bombing campaign on Lebanon. So welcome, Nancy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Nancy. I'm from the PYM-KW network, the Palestinian Youth Movement. I just like to give a little background about our work. PYM is an international grassroots independent movement made of Palestinians and Arab youth fighting for the liberation of our homeland from Zionism and imperialism. At PYM, we uphold the right of Palestinian people to resist colonial domination and racist occupation. And we reject the framing that reduces us to victims of colonial violence alone. We believe our role in the diaspora is to mobilize our communities to stand firm with our people in Palestine as they struggle against Zionism's crimes. When our people in Palestine rise or across countries in the Arab world, we rise in the locations where we live. We must demonstrate that Palestinians are committed to our people's liberation from Zionist colonization and that we have not abandoned our righteous cause or our people. Historically and today, this diaspora has played a pivotal role in mobilizing our communities wherever they exist to advance the struggle in Palestine. We seek to build community power. A strong, engaged community is unified through action in service of our people and our struggle. For over a year, Israel has committed unrelenting genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people in Gaza with complete impunity. And for the past year, we have refused to stay silent and to give in by organizing mass mobilizations across the globe through pickets, walkouts, rallies, and more. And now countries like Lebanon have dared to take action to demand an end to the continuous death and destruction of our people. And Israel is collectively punishing the people of Lebanon to deflect from their massive failures in Gaza and in their genocide. Even before this attack, Zionist aggression has targeted the entire region. Not only has Israel murdered tens of thousands of Palestinians in the past year, but they've also martyred hundreds of people in southern Lebanon as well. This attack against Lebanon is Israel's latest attempt to provoke a regional war. It is part of a century-long campaign to dominate and ultimately seize land in our region, expelling our people and clearing more territory for their settler colonial project. The F-35 fighter jet is the most advanced warplane used by the Israeli forces and has been integral to facilitating the mass death and destruction in Gaza. dropping 2,000 pounds of US-made bombs built with Canadian technology. These fighter jets are not only being used in Gaza, but in Lebanon too. And my family has been a first-hand victim of these bombs, even back in 2006, when my family had been displaced again and relocated to Syria during the 2006 war. But again, in 2006, it was not the first time Israel has bombed Lebanon. They attacked in 78, in 82, in the 2000. And like I said, this has been a constant campaign. But I do remember some stories that back in 2006, I remember running away with my family while my mom was pregnant with my little brother. And we had to drive at night, hoping we wouldn't get bombed on the way to fleeing to Syria. I remember having also, our family had to call my dad every day to make sure that he was still alive, and then he was still waiting for us in Lebanon as well. So we have to just really think about the damage that this is doing for not only families of people in the diaspora, but literally every person that is there being actively affected by these bombs. And Israel has used the F-35 extensively in its offense in Lebanon. More than 2,500 people have been killed in in Lebanon by Israel since October 2023, with most of the deaths occurring in the past month. There is footage of Israeli F-35 fighter jets refueling over the skies of Lebanon. The F-35 has been described as the most lethal fighter jet in the world. And since September 23, Israeli strikes has damaged many vital infrastructure, including 34 hospitals, killed over 100 emergency medical technicians, and have hit more than 100 ambulances as well. More than 3,600 buildings in Lebanon have been damaged or destroyed as well. And the consequence of this is that more than 1.2 million people are now displaced. Some had to sleep on the streets of Beirut, and some were able to seek refuge at schools. Many also have to share those classrooms at schools with other displaced families. There has been instances where they described that the mattresses were arranged on the floor and their belongings were packed into plastic bags and just hung around the school as well. Not to mention the psychological horror of having to endure the sounds of airstrike every day. Before I continue, I will, Rachel, would you be able to play the video?
هاي بالبرج حد مستشفى البرج الحمد لله على السلامة.
We just wanted to show this little video that was sent to me by a family friend, just so we can picture the level of destruction that is happening on the ground, you know? And in the video, the man was saying, oh, this is the Burj hospital. Like literally, you don't see any hospital, you only see rubbles. And so just picture this, just this much destruction in one street alone. And we have to keep in mind, this is also a residential area where families live. This is where families live and also Palestinian refugees as well. This area is also packed with Palestinian refugee camps where they've been there since 48, just generation after generation. And right now, my own family in Lebanon are facing the brunt of those horrors. My aunt is seeking refuge in a small apartment crammed with 25 other family members. My little cousins can't even go to school right now and have to live 24/7 with the sounds of bombs, attempting to sleep through it. This constant violence against the South is not new, is nothing new. It is in fact a strategy of the Israeli genocidal campaign called the Dahi Doctrine. This strategy consists of refusing to distinguish between civilian and military targets in a futile attempt to alienate the people from the resistance that defends them. The doctrine is named after my neighborhood in southern suburbs of Beirut, where Israel extensively damages civilian housing and infrastructure in 2006, and where it currently wreaking catastrophic damage again. Since 2006, the Zionist entity has repeatedly but unsuccessfully deployed the Dahi Doctrine across the region from Gaza to Lebanon. And that's why we go back to our action on November 16th. So on November 16th, communities from every coast, from every city will be mobilizing outside facilities and companies producing parts for the F-35 fighter jets that are dropping bombs on Gaza and Lebanon as we speak. Despite the Canadian government's repeatedly claim the contrary, Canada is still arming genocide. And by targeting Canadian manufacturers involved in the F-35 supply chain, we are making Canada's complicity in Israel's violence undeniable, pushing back on the government's lies and also demanding that government action to ensure the flow of arms to Israel will be cut off. Canada must do everything in its power to end the flow of weapons to Israel's genocide. I live in KW, and multiple factories in our neighborhoods are making components for those killing machines. Even our MPs are gleefully touring the sites that manufacture the facilitation of genocide. So here at KW, we will be organizing an action, and I do encourage everyone to take concrete action and to refuse to allow our neighborhoods to house these genocidal factories. So by targeting Canadian manufacturers involved in the F-35 supply chain, we are making Canada's complicity undeniable again. So I do encourage everyone to come out on November 16th, KW alongside many other cities. And yeah, I just encourage you everyone to come out to an action, being organized in your city and join together to expose the ongoing Canada-Israel arms trade and uplift our demand for an immediate enforced two-way arms embargo. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I just want to uplift what so many people were saying in the chat, which is thank you for sharing so much of this, what is so incredibly personal for you, and all the incredible work that you continue to lean on in the midst of that. It's absolutely incredible. And just to uplift that the Palestinian Youth Movement Kitchener-Waterloo chapter, like Nancy said, will be carrying out an action. You can follow them online. I encourage you to check them out on Instagram. And the more people that register their actions on the registration page that has been linked on the Arms Embargo Now website, the more we can link you together if there are multiple people in multiple cities. And you can follow actions that are happening in other cities as well and support digitally if you are not able to go to one yourself. I'm going to push us on to our final speaker tonight, who is Anna Lippman. Anna is with Labor for Palestine and is going to speak a little bit to the role of workers in interrupting the arms trade. Anna is a member of QP 3903 and part of the National Steering Committee for Labor for Palestine. Anna.
Thanks everyone for being here tonight, and thank you again, Nancy, for sharing your family's story. So, you know, we as workers are uniquely positioned to stop the arms trade and enact BDS, because we as workers are directly connected to the means of production. And this is such a direct and material way to be able to contribute to the struggle for a liberated Palestine, right? And so as unionists, we know that our fight has always been against oppression and global capitalist exploitation. And the global nature of the labor movement is most evident when we consider how many workers in Canada are producing parts for weapons used in this Israeli genocide in Gaza. And despite the many calls from the ICJ, from the UN, from other countries, for Canada to stop enabling Israel's genocide and for countries to enact a two-way arms embargo with Israel, Canada is still buying and selling weapons to the Zionist entity. And so we know that this is because it's profitable. And we know that profits will always motivate those in power more than morals ever will, right? And so it is our duty as workers to directly disrupt these profits until our calls are met. And this thinking and this strategy is exactly what we do when we enact labor strikes to get so many of the things that we've won for workers here in Canada. And we've seen the power and the role of workers in previous imperial struggles all over the world. In Canada, the South African apartheid and BDS enactment against it was coordinated in a large part because workers themselves took action after researching the complicity of their company. Because, like Rachel said, they really try to hide that information, right? And these actions pushed Canadian Labour Congress, other labor groups, faith groups to push the Canadian government, who eventually enacted sanctions, boycotts, and divestments from South Africa. And we've seen workers around the world take creative action against war and imperialism in the name of their labor. In Canada, we saw in the 70s and 80s refusals to handle mail to and from South Africa and calls to and from South Africa. In Scotland, we saw Rolls-Royce workers refusing to work on parts headed to Chile during the Pinochet regime. And these are examples of workers refusing hot cargo or refusing to have to work or handle any goods that are going to an entity that treats workers unfairly. This was invoked against South African apartheid, and this is exactly what's happening in Israel right now. We are seeing Israel treat all the people of Palestine, particularly Gaza, and the workers there incredibly unfairly. And we have a duty as workers here to not engage in any sort of work or labor that's going to profit that. And so in 1999, we actually saw the Canadian Labour Congress declare all goods from Indonesia as hot cargo and call for a boycott of all goods and demand sanctions from Canada. So we're not recreating the wheel here. We're building on these processes that have worked so well in previous struggles. And so really, the stage has been set for us as workers to act. And we have a uniquely important role in enacting a federal BDS policy against Israel. This is what exactly Palestinian workers are asking from us right now, and we have a duty to not let them down. And so, as PYM has told us to do, we need to enact a people's arms embargo. And that means that we need to be stopping these weapons from going out, these parts. We need to be stopping these manufacturing hubs happening in our backyard. with our tax money, right? And so it's important to recognize that in this struggle, the workers at these companies are not our enemy. They're interested in paying rent, just like the rest of us, right? And many of them might not even know where their labor is going to, because we know these companies are trying to obscure their impact on Israeli weaponry, right? And so actually, these workers are our greatest allies in the struggle to shut down these factories, right? They can give us intel. They can work slow. We also know that some of these workers are unionized, and that gives them huge leverage to call for things like stop work orders, hot cargo. And in fact, the workers in these factories have more power, unless someone from these factories is on this call, have more power than anyone in this room to intervene and call for a two-way arms embargo. And so here we are, almost 400 days into a live stream genocide. And frankly, our government has not done shit about it. And so on November 16th, I'm going to be out there demanding that Canada stop arming Israel. And we hope to see you there too.
Thank you so much, Anna. There's so much action in the chat for this. Also, just a reminder to everybody, we are getting pumped up for this day of action, November 16th. I just want to do a quick couple reminders, then we're going to do some questions, question answer from the Q&A chat function. All of the materials that you have seen today are available to you on the Arms Embargo Now website, armsembargonow.ca /F35. You can see the toolkit that has been reviewed. You can see the map that has been devised of locations. There is a registration link for you to register your action, register your rally, or get real creative and aspire to be Vancouver and do a whole bunch of things to get people involved and shed light on the weapons facility that is near you manufacturing. If you are in a city that has multiple actions that are kicking off, as has been answered in the chat, if to multiple cities sign up for multiples of the same type of rally, we will connect you with each other. So don't worry about that, and follow all the other actions and share them online. You will also be able to amplify. There's going to be digital actions that you can take. If you are in an area where there is not a facility that you can go to, there are ways for you to get involved. So visit the website, go through the materials, and use what makes sense for you and support other folks setting off actions. I'm going to pass it over to our Q&A answerers, I think Johanna and Emma, to go through the last few questions that folks have been asking.
Thanks so much, Maya, and thank you, everybody. So many inspiring speakers tonight. Really powerful to hear everybody's words. So just a reminder that the Q&A function at the bottom of Zoom is open. We've got a number of questions that have come in through the course of this evening, and we've tried to answer some by texting you back in the chat, but we are now going to bring some of them to our amazing panel of speakers. So first off, and I would maybe direct this question to Rachel to start, but if anybody else, any of our other speakers would also like to jump in, we'd love to hear from you. We had a couple questions that were really asking about kind of movement strategy and kind of the campaign and the wider Palestine solidarity movement over the last year, and maybe specifically speaking to this arms embargo demand. There's some people who are asking, what has the most effective methods of pressuring the government been? If you could speak a little bit to what you think has like allowed this movement to have power and be impactful. I think there's a lot of interest to know how we were able to get the campaign wins that I know we haven't won everything, but we've won a lot, and it's been really a powerful and inspiring campaign and powerful movement. So Rachel, do you want to maybe kick us off to start?
Yeah, I can start on that. So, I mean, I'm really fortunate to work with World Beyond War, which is an abolitionist organization. Like, we're really seeking to abolish war and the military-industrial complex. But I take a lot of inspiration from other abolitionist movements. And I think a lot about a really key component of the prison abolitionist movement, which is working towards a horizon of prison abolition and making sure that everything you do is pointing towards that horizon. So not building new, better, more queer-friendly prisons. Like, no, like, what can we do? It is all pointing us towards this horizon. And what I've been seeing in the past year in like across so-called Canada is like a lot of that horizon. And around the arms embargo campaign, I've been seeing people working in very different spheres, but really doggedly pointing towards that. So on one hand, not letting the Liberal government lead us astray through their lies, as Martin so keenly laid out, and refusing to be kind of like sidetracked in responding to the nonsense about how we've already ended the Canada-Israel arms trade. No, you haven't. But also not getting caught up in like, oh, are these weapons parts lethal or non-lethal, or oh, but what about the Canadian economy and like the money that we get from selling of it, like really pushing all that aside and really remaining focused on how do we make sure that we are not materially accomplices in this genocide in many different ways. And within the arms embargo campaign, I've been seeing that in terms of some of what we talked about here today, like other actions that have happened over the past year at weapons factories specifically, whether that is engaging with those workers, connecting with the unions, but then also people who have been showing up time after time and shutting down shifts at that factory by being in front of the gates and not letting anyone in that day. But also there's been incredible work from lawyer friends of ours who are suing the Canadian government right now in federal court because they are not following, because the Canadian government and Global Affairs Canada is not following Canadian laws on arms trades exports. So right now that is a lawsuit that the Canadian government is having to contend with, that is slowly moving through the court system. And companies are beginning to have to provide documents that they never had to make public before. We have some MPs, frankly, who are standing up to what the Liberal government is doing right now in the Defense Committee, a parliamentary committee that maybe a lot of people don't pay that much attention to. There is a motion being debated that would actually force the Canadian government to reveal tons of information about the arms trade that has never been revealed before. That motion for a parliamentary study about the Canadian arms trade is being put forward by NDP MP Lindsay Matheson. So people pushing for information, people pushing the government in the courts, people constantly holding their feet to the fire on the streets. And then, of course, the incredible leadership of Palestinian and Lebanese communities across the country who are reminding us constantly of, first of all, what is at stake on the ground, but also of the power of these communities here and of our solidarity. I'm really fortunate to organize within Jews Say No to Genocide and to see Jewish communities rising up across the country in ways that I've never seen before. And I know everyone in their own community is seeing the same thing, whether it's teachers at schools. Anyways, I could go on, but I actually think maybe it's not a satisfying answer, but I actually think what is working here is that people are pushing this forward in their lane and in their sphere and in their community, but all pointed in the same direction. And no one is throwing anyone else under the bus. No one is saying, oh, that tactic's bad, or we shouldn't be doing that, or that is not as effective. Actually, we're all effective if we're all pushing this forward together where we are. That's my personal perspective. Personally, I would love to hear from Martin on this, who wrote a book about Justin Trudeau and his political leanings. I'm curious, Martin, what thoughts you have on like what is working to push his government.
Sorry, folks. I had to dip out to deal with my toddler. Tried to avert one of those BBC moments of them careening into the room screaming. Thanks, Rachel. Your answer was great. Like a few years ago when I wrote that book about the Trudeau government, I was doing a public event and someone asked about the Palestine question. And at that time, liberals weren't saying a word about Palestine and Palestinians. The liberals are very good at choreographing their concern for some injustice, but then doing very little to remedy it. But at the time, the Palestinian, solidarity movement hadn't even got to the point where liberals were having to pay lip service. And so I think that has dramatically changed. And so that's why I think we've started to see the kind of the lengths to which the Liberal government is going now to try to get ahead of these movements that have been organizing, and to make a show of their concern. And so to that degree, to the fact, as I said earlier, they're lying now about trying to do the right thing. I think that's always the first step with liberals. And the next step, of course, is pushing them further. The thing about liberals that sets them apart from conservatives is that depending on which way the wind is blowing, they will shift. And so movements have to be the wind. And if we build enough force and power in our movements, we can push the liberals in the right direction. But I don't think we shouldn't have any illusions about how much that takes. We do need to build up a lot more power, I think, than the left and the Palestinian Solidarity Movement currently has. I think we need to see labor movements, stepping up a lot more. I think it was Anna who mentioned in the 70s and 80s, militant labor unions were really the backbone of these kinds of movements of international solidarity. And, there are terrific initiatives like Labor for Palestine, that are on the margins pushing, various labor unions. And we need to, if you're a member of a labor union, get involved at that level, pushing your labor union. I do think one of the things that has really heartened me as well is the amount of interconnection that people are forging between movements. That's something that I have never seen before. Different social movement sectors coming out in support of Palestine. I think that is laying the groundwork for much good that can come. I think Emma just shared an article too about the really impressive organizing work that was happening at the riding level by the Palestine Solidarity Network. Is it? Yes. And I mean, that to me showed how much riding level pressure effectively deployed in ridings where liberals had a small margin of victory. Deployed in that way, grassroots social movement pressure can have a lot of impact. And I know there are debates about there was very fractious and stormy debates about the resolution that was passed in March, NDP resolution that was watered down, but then passed by the Liberals. To me, that was a testament to the incredible organizing done at the riding level, also by Muslim and Arab organizations. Barring liberals from their mosques, threatening to withhold funding and donations to the Liberal Party, the youth-led movement that was getting huge numbers in the street. That, I think, this force applied at various levels has, I think, forced the liberals to do stuff that I don't think I would have thought was imaginable, a year ago, 6 months ago, even. So to the extent that the liberals are a little bit more receptive to movement pressure, we can, I think, get a lot done under them in the next year. I think it's going to be a very different picture under the conservative government if the conservatives come into power. So I think it's really important to keep pushing as people have been doing.
Yeah, thank you both for those answers. It does feel like a real powerful alignment of a whole different variety of tactics and people like organizing in so many different, pushing in so many different ways and different spheres. It's really been powerful coalescing. Anna or Nancy, do either of you have thoughts about kind of your reflections about what's been working over the last year? If not, we can throw to the next question. Just wanted to hear. All right. So there were a couple other questions that came in about kind of the specifics of how this could work. And I know we don't want to get too deep in the policy weeds here necessarily. We've already done a fair amount of technical information, but if Rachel maybe or anybody else on the panel wants to kind of give a quick the kind of quick and dirty headline about like, how is this a possible thing to ask for? I know one of the things that the government often lies about, like it isn't possible to track where these parts go, or it isn't possible for us to do this. And I think that we're trying to make it clear in this campaign that it is actually a doable, winnable campaign. So does somebody want to give some answers in case people are getting that kind of pushback from their government representatives when they're asking for an arms embargo?
And maybe, Rachel, if you could specifically talk about like how does the government actually implement an arms embargo? I think for those of us who, don't understand all the technicalities of this, like I know, for example, in the summertime, it was like that Parliament doesn't actually need to be sitting in order to implement an arms embargo. So if you could elaborate on that a bit, I think it would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that it is like in the interest of the government to make it seem like everything is much more complicated than it is. I think that's true for a lot of things. Yeah, Melanie Joly could implement an arms embargo on Israel today. I mean, frankly, 6 months ago or several years ago. But and in fact, Canada did have a full two-way arms embargo on Israel in, I don't remember the year, in the 80s, at another like heinous moment of Israeli military violence. So this is not a new and unique tool that we are inventing. This type of sanction is something that the government has used before, was very, very, very quick to implement on Russia 2 years ago, for instance. Like, this is a tool they know how to use. I mean, specifically under so Canada is a signatory to the Arms Trade Treaty, which is a global treaty that governs, the ways that states should not be exporting weapons to countries where there is risk of them being used for the abuse of human rights. I mean, this is so far past the line of the risk of them being used in that way by Israel that Canada should long have implemented its own domestic legislation, which is EPA, its own domestic version of the Arms Trade Treaty, to cut off the flow of all weapons to Israel. SEMA is another piece of legislation that Canada, and a system that Canada already has in place to be able to implement sanctions. Well, that to say, without getting too much in the weeds on this, is that the government has these tools available to it. And they will say many different types of things to make this seem much more difficult than it is. I'm sure that as we continue to raise our voices around the F-35, I would say this aspect of the campaign, really focusing on the F-35 jet as a key example, is kind of just starting. I have no doubt that in a few weeks, what we'll hear from the government in response is, well, there are many countries all over the world that are buying F-35 jets, including Canada is now buying F-35 jets from Lockheed Martin. We can't cut off the flow of these components. We wouldn't even know which ones are going to Israel, for example. That's complete nonsense. Lockheed Martin absolutely knows within its supply chain which components are going to which batch of jets, which are destined for Israel. But I've no doubt they will say, oh, we don't want to cut off the flow, the F-35 supply chain flow, because that will affect all these other countries too. No doubt they will also say, oh, any number of things like, and I know some MPs are already saying this, oh, well, the parts being built now, these jets take many years to make. If we cut off the F-35 supply chain, that would only affect planes that are going to be made in, who knows, 5-10 years time. That is also nonsense. We know that the way that the F-35 supply chain works, as parts wear down, and there's a ton of wear and tear on specifically the Israeli F-35s based on the ways that they are using them, they are sending back to the original manufacturers, including the Canadian manufacturers of these parts, to replace those parts on the jets that Israel is using right now. So it's absolutely not true that if we cut off the chain of F-35 parts in Canada to Israel, that it would not have an impact. It would. I don't even want to get too much in the weeds on all the things the Canadian government is going to say about why what we're asking for is impossible or it doesn't matter. But this is the most expensive weapons program on the planet. All of these parts are meticulously tracked. Absolutely. Lockheed Martin in Texas knows that which Canadian suppliers are providing which parts that are for Israeli jets. And absolutely, Canada can immediately cut off the supply of its components for Israel.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm hearing it's a very winnable demand. That's what we like to hear. Nancy, do you want to wrap us up and then we'll throw back to Maya to close out the night?
Yes, sorry, I wanted to speak before, but my laptop was about to die, so I was like, oh, I have to put the charger on. But I did want to add that just a way that I have found to be very successful with pressuring our MPs is having those specific groups that this is their main target. So groups like Neighbors for Palestine, specifically our neighborhood group here in Waterloo, we have Waterloo for Palestine, and one of their main goals or main campaigns is to focus on working to pressure MPs in the area, whether it's in Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, but because there's so many different groups and every group is like has this priority thing that they work on. So I found that it was very, very effective having specific groups that only work towards targeting MPs, specifically just community members that they mobilize lots of community members to go out to sign petition, to send emails, to request meetings with our MPs. And I feel like that was super important because we're showing them that our community is not only united, but if you don't do what your community is asking you for, then you're not going to be winning the next election. And I feel like it is important to point that out to all of our MPs in our area that they need us to win the election. And if they are not doing what their communities are asking for, then we're not going to be voting for them and they will not be getting a seat next term. So I feel like that is super important. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Nancy. And I think that's a fantastic point to leave off on, that power is being built. It has been built. All of you are part of building that. There are actions planned from coast to coast for November 16th, building on powerful structures of people mobilizing in their communities, in their ridings, in their places of worship, in their workplaces, on the shop floor. These are all places and sites of struggle that so many of you are participating in. So many people in our communities are participating in. This is a winnable thing. We can win this thing. On November 16th, there are going to be actions across the country. If you have not signed up for one, and you can still, if there is a weapons manufacturing facility in your community or close by, sign up, register your action, go to armsembargonow.ca/F37. You can see the action toolkit. You can register your action there. You can get the information on the interactive map that Rachel shared earlier. You can follow all the organizations that have spoken tonight who are going to be supporting this National Day of Action, and you can get involved for the next one. Because as Rachel already said and Nancy drove home, people are scared. People in the halls of power are scared because we have created accountability mechanisms by getting really organized in every aspect of our lives. So don't let that slow you down. Be a little bit uplifted by how many people. We had almost 400 people join for 2.5 hours on a weekday. That is no small thing. And over 1,000 people registered for this webinar. People are listening and paying attention, and you're a part of that tonight. So thank you for taking the time to do that. And don't forget to check us out online and sign up your action as soon as possible. It will be exciting for other people to see how many more actions get added in the next few days, and you could be one of those people. There's also going to be digital actions that you can get involved in. So if you're not in a place where there is a weapons manufacturing facility, there are other ways for you to get involved. So follow up on the website for more information there. And thank you all of you for coming tonight and for all of our speakers. I hope everybody gets some sleep, and we will see you in the coming days. Take care.